Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. My name is Raymond, and in this video I'm going to talk about Momiji by Japanime Games and Deer Games, which is a set collection game for 1 to 4 players, which plays in about half an hour for ages 8 and up. And before I start explaining how to play the game and share my thoughts on it, I'd like to ask you to please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. That really helps the channel. And there's also a Patreon if you'd like to support me financially. You can do so for as little as just €1 per month, and in return you'll get early access to all of my videos, access to some Patreon exclusive posts, and your name in the credits as well. Alright, let's get started. In Momiji, players try to get the most points by collecting the most leaves and leaves of the highest value in stacks in front of them in their player area, and also by collecting and completing objective tokens for extra points and acorns for extra points. All of those points are added up, and the player with the most points wins the game. There are 84 leaf cards in the game in 6 different suits, 6 different colors and leaf shapes. And every leaf type has 5 0 cards, 4 1 cards, 3 2 cards, and 2 3 cards. To set up a game of Momiji for a 4-player game, just simply take all of the cards, give that a shuffle, and put the deck upside down in the middle of the table. If you're playing a 3-player game, you need to remove 1 color, that's 1 suit of all the cards from the deck, and remove those, put them back in the box. And if you're playing a 2-player game, you need to remove 2 colors, 2 suits of cards from the deck, and then give that deck a shuffle and put it in the middle of the table. Next, after you've shuffled the deck, deal every player 4 cards. So 1, 2, 3, 4 cards for each player. And after you've done that, turn over the first 4 cards of the deck and sort them by color. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you have different colors, you just have different columns, but the cards of the same color are stacked on top of each other in such a way that you can still read their values. Then check out all of your objective tokens and remove any tokens that are related to the colors of cards that you removed in a 2 or 3-player game. So for example, had I removed the green cards, I would have removed this token. If I also removed the yellow cards, I would have removed that token. But otherwise, just keep all of the tokens, turn them all over to their Tory side. And after you've done that, you randomly select 5 tokens to play with. So let me just quickly do that. You turn these over, give them a quick shuffle, and then randomly select 5 tokens. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. And those are flipped over, and those will be the objectives you can play with. From the remaining tokens, you take a number of tokens equal to the number of players. So in a 4-player game, you take 4 plus 2. So that means in a 3-player game, you have 5, and in a 2-player game, you have 4. The rest of the tokens are removed from the game, and you just keep these in a separate pile. And for your first game ever of Momiji, it is suggested that you give each player these landscape tiles with the letters A, B, and C. There are 4 sets of these. They all have different symbols on the lower right over there. So there's 4 sets of ABC cards to start out with, and these landscape cards will give you a one-time special ability, and if you use that special ability, you simply put the card sideways to indicate that you've used it. For later games, you remove 2 of those sets from the game, and then you shuffle the rest in with all of these cards, because all of these cards have more letters. There are 2 D's, 2 E's, so you basically add 2 A's and 2 B's and 2 C's. The remaining A, B, and C's are removed, and you shuffle all of those in with these cards, and they go all the way up to N. And then you just shuffle all of those cards together and reveal 3 of them in the middle of the table. And then in clockwise order, starting with the first player, who you determine at the start of the game, every player chooses a landscape card and then reveals a new one from the deck to add to the middle of the table. And then you continue until each player has 3 landscape cards, and you place those cards in front of you on the table. The remaining landscape cards are again returned to the box. Give the first player 4 acorn tokens of value 1, that's the smaller ones here, the yellow ones, and give all the other players 5 acorn tokens and keep the other tokens in easy reach. That is the setup of the game. Let's explain the rules. Turns are played in clockwise order, starting with the starting player, and during your turn you must perform only one of 3 main actions. The first one is collect leaf cards from the display, and when you do, you take the entire column of cards. The second one is playing leaf cards in your personal area, or you can activate an objective token. There's also a couple of optional actions. You can use one of those landscape abilities. They can all be used once per game. Or you can discard any 2 cards from your hand to obtain 1 acorn token. You can perform one or both of those optional actions, but only once each turn. At the end of your turn, you can only hold a maximum of 8 cards in your hand, and excess cards must be discarded. So the first action, collecting leaf cards, means you take an entire column of leaf cards from the display and you place them in your hand. And before taking the cards, you may optionally return 1 acorn to the general stock to draw 4 cards from the deck. So for example, if I pay this one, I draw 4 cards. So that's a 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4. So that's a yellow card. Let me just move these to the side, and they all have their own column. And after you've done that, you can proceed by picking one of those columns to add to your hand. So for example, maybe I want to have this card. Now note that as soon as any of these column stacks here already has 6 cards, then you discard any more cards of that type as soon as they are revealed. Should the display at some point be completely empty, then you immediately draw 4 new cards to make a new display. The second option that you can choose to do is to play leaf cards to your personal area in front of you, and you create different piles for each type of leaf. Now each pile must start with the number 0, and after that cards with the same type of leaf must be placed on top of each other, and you cannot look at the numbers on the cards below the top card. So you basically stack them directly on top. And if you add a card to a pile, it must have the same number as the top card or the next higher number. So you cannot play a 2 on a 0 or another 0 on a 1. However, it is not possible to play another card on top of a 3. Even when there are multiple 3s of any suit in the game, you can only play 1 3 on top of your deck, and they have the Tory symbol here on the card to indicate that that stack is now closed. And each time a leaf pile is closed with a 3, you place a Tory token on that pile. If the Tory tokens run out, you simply don't put a token on top, but it's still closed. Now when you play leaf cards in your personal area, you can choose one of the following options. You can play 1 or 2 leaf cards of the same type. If I had any of the same, I could do this and then perhaps place another 0 or a 1 if I had it on top of that. If I don't, I just play 1. Or I can play 2 or more leaf cards of different types and then activate any matching acorn bonuses. So for example, if I have another 0 here and I want to play that, I can play this one as well, and I can match them up next to each other. So these cards both have an acorn on the matching sides here. So that means I get 2 acorn tokens. Note that once your cards are played, you cannot change the order in which they are placed on the table. You are also not allowed, like I said, to peek at the cards below the top card or count the number of cards in a stack. And you only get acorn bonuses if you play multiple cards of different suits. You don't get any acorn bonuses if you play 1 or 2 cards of the same suit. Also note that the matching icons do not need to be on the cards you played in the current turn. So if this was already on the table and I played another purple 0 card on top of this, then I would still have a matching set and earn 2 acorns. The third main action I can choose from is to activate an objective token. So these are the objective tokens that we picked for this game. And you do that by spending 3 acorn tokens. So you pay 3 acorn tokens back to the general pile, and then you pick the objective token that you want to complete and you place it in your personal area. So for example, maybe I wanted this one. And that means that you are now the owner of that token and you can try to fulfill that achievement. Now, anyone in the game, anyone playing can try to achieve this objective, but the owner will get 10 points when achieving this objective. Another player, if they achieve this objective, they only get 3 points. Optionally, if you want to activate one of your landscape abilities, which you can only play once per game, you can place one of your acorn tokens on that card. I'll tap the card as well to indicate that I used it. And the acorn token that you put on that ability card is not used in final scoring. So play continues like this, with players taking turns in clockwise order, playing one of those 3 actions and possible optional actions as well, until the deck runs out. Now when that happens, the game ends. The game also ends if there are no more Torii tokens in the game. So either this number of tokens or the deck runs out. That's the end of the game. Then every player, including the person who triggered the end of the game, plays one final turn, and then you score your points. So here's an example of scoring. So once all players have finished their last turn, all the players discard any acorn tokens on their landscape cards because those were paid to activate that ability, and then you count your score as follows, and you get a handy score pad with the game to write everything down here. There's even a pencil in the game. Now for each leaf pile in your personal area, you score a number of victory points equal to the number of cards in that pile multiplied by the value on the topmost card. So this would be 0 points. And then the second stack here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards times 2, that's 10 points. So I can note here the orange leaves, that's 0 for me, and the red ones, that was 10 points for me. And then here I have 4 cards in the yellow pile times 2, that's 8 points. I'll write down 8 points there. This is 0. I have 3 cards here times 1, that's 3 points for that. We had 0 here. And then finally we have the brown deck, and I used one of the abilities to skip the 2 here. I will explain those abilities in a bit. So that's 4 cards times 3 on the top card there, and that is 12. Then you count the number of acorn points that you have. The pink ones are worth 5 points. The yellow ones are worth 1 point. So I have 5, 6, 7, 8 points there. So you note that on your sheet as well. Then every activated, so owned objective token that I actually completed is worth 10 points. I can also score if I completed one of the other objective tokens that other players have activated, so they own them, not the ones that are still left on the table, they don't count. But if I manage to successfully complete one of those, that's 3 points. So maybe I didn't complete this one, I didn't have the most acorns, that's this objective, but maybe I did have the most combined cards of the red, orange and yellow leaves, and that would mean I had 10 points for that. And maybe I also had this, the most brown leaves, that's 3 points, so that would be 13 perhaps in this example. And you simply count up your entire score, and the person with the most points is the winner of the game. In case of a tie, the player with the most cards left in their hand is the winner, and in case of a tie further, then the victory is shared. So like I said, the game has several different objective tokens, and these are all explained on the back of the rule book. So you have tiles, these tokens with just one color of leaf, one suit of cards on them, and that simply means you have the most cards of that leaf type. This means you have the most cards in a single pile. This objective token means to have the highest topmost leaf card values. So you add up the values of the topmost cards together, and the person with the highest score has fulfilled that objective. There's also the person with the most piles with a Torii token on top that gets points. This simply means have the most acorns. This means have the highest sum of different leaf piles and unused landscape abilities. This with the O on it, 0, have the most 0 cards played in all of your leaf piles, not necessarily visible. This means have the most cards in your red, orange, and yellow piles. The same here with the green, purple, and brown piles. This means have the fewest cards played in your personal area. And this means have the most cards in your hand at the end of the game. There's also a page that explains all the different landscape cards from A to N. I won't explain all of those in detail here, but the first ones for the starting game, the A, B, and C cards, are pretty straightforward. You can choose to play leaf cards in your personal area as your main action, and you can skip one number. So in this case, if you spend that one acorn for that landscape card, you can play a 2 on a 0, or a 3 on a 1, or start a new pile with a 1 instead of a 0. The B card lets you, if you choose to take leaf cards as your main action, you can take 2 different columns from the display instead of just 1. You can only take whole columns, and the total number of cards taken must not exceed 4. And the C card lets you rearrange the position of your leaf piles and then take 2 acorn tokens from the general stock. So these are the more advanced ones, D through N, and you can just read those in the rule book, and they give a bit more advanced options to use during the game. And those are all the rules to Momiji. Let's go to my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on Momiji by Japanime Games and Deer Games, and I'd like to thank Japanime Games for giving me a demo copy of the game to review. Very much appreciated. Let's start with the components. So the components are very good. The card quality is very nice. They have a good thickness. They have a linen finishing, all of them. They have clear icons of all the suits, the colors. The leaves even have different shapes for the colorblind to make them out more easily. And they also have little icons that indicate whether they have these acorns on the bottom, and if so, if there's 1 on whether side, or if there's 2 or none. So that also helps, and they're on both sides of the top of the card. So if you hold them like this or like this, it doesn't matter, you can still read that. So that's very well done. The tokens are of a good quality. They have a nice thickness. They're printed clearly. They're nice and big as well, so you can clearly see what's on them. You also have the 2 different denominations for these acorns. The smaller ones are 1 point, and they're in yellow, and the reddish orange ones are 5 points, and they're slightly bigger as well, so that's fine. The box is nice and sturdy, good quality box, although it is bigger than it needs to be, because you only have 2 stacks of cards. You have these leaf cards and these landscape cards and a bunch of tokens that you can toss in a bag. The rule book, which is very thin, it is very clear, and it is nicely written, and it has plenty of illustrations to help with the rules as well. So that's good. And you have a tiny little notepad that you have to keep score at the end. So you only need 1 sheet per game. If you're playing 4 players, if you're playing 2 players, you can use it twice. And you basically, if you laminate one of these and you have a dry erase marker, that's really all you need. And you can also just take just a piece of paper and write down your scores. This is just helpful. And they also added a pencil, but that's all that is in the box. So in my opinion, the box could have been half its size to save space on your shelves. Otherwise, the components are very good. The artwork is absolutely stunning. I love the art. I love the art on the box itself. I love the art on these landscape cards, and I love the fact that you can all connect them as actual panoramas, and you can put them on either side. They all connect, and it looks really lovely. You only have 3 in any game, but you can mix them up every time you play, and it just looks really nice on the table. I also like all the different leaves. Every suit, there's 6 different colors, 6 suits of leaves, and they all have their own art. They do have the same art for all of the cards in the same suit, however, so even if the values are different, it's still the same art, and I feel they could have perhaps made a different piece of art of the same color, of course, for the 0, the 1, the 2, and the 3. That would have added to the artwork, of course. On the other hand, art costs money, so perhaps this was just a financial decision. But that's a bit of a shame, seeing how lovely the art is. I would have loved to see more of that. But anyway, the really beauty is in these landscape cards anyway, so that's pretty cool. The theme is nice. I do like the idea of collecting leaves and having these different colors, and it really feels nice, but in the end it doesn't really add to the gameplay, because technically all you're doing is making stacks of as many suits that you can get in ascending value from 0 to 1 to 2 and hopefully to 3 as well, because the more cards in your stack and the higher the top card, the better you score. And you could have done that with any theme, I guess. But the leaf collecting theme in autumn does lend for beautiful art, like I said, on both the leaves cards, the suits, and the landscape cards. So even though the theme doesn't really matter that much, it does make for a beautiful game. So neutral on the theme there. What's important, of course, is the gameplay. Now, the gameplay is a lot of fun. I found that after the first time we played this, it clicks. First time you play it, you're kind of like, well, I know what to do. I know how to make these stacks. I know that I need to start at 0 and then go to 1 and 2 and 3. And you can't go lower, and you can't skip a number unless you have a card that lets you skip a number once per game. But other than that, you kind of know what to do, and you know you can take the cards from the central market if you want to. You can take one full row or column, and you can, pay an acorn to get 4 new cards in the center. And there's not that many options really. But the trick is, and that's the nice thing about this game, this is something you learn after playing it once, that it's kind of a balancing act, because at some point the stack of cards will run out, and that's game over. Everybody gets one more turn, and then it's done. So you don't want to have too many cards on your hand at the end of the game, because you can't use them anymore. That's just lost cards. So you want to find a balance between getting new cards and playing cards, and also when to progress the number. If you can play multiple zeros, that's great, but if you end with a 0 or a 1, then you won't score that much. Whereas if you score a 2 or a 3 on top of your deck of cards, that scores a lot more, obviously. So the trick is to figure out when to do that, when to play the 2s and the 3s on top of your deck, because obviously you can't go back, and you might have a bunch of 0s and 1s that you wanted to play on that deck, but you couldn't because the end is nigh. It's, when you're going through the deck really fast, then it's going to end, so you have to put those higher numbers on there. So it's a bit of a race to building those stacks, getting the most cards in them, trying to get the best cards from the market, from basically from where you find the leaves on your paths, on your walks thematically. But other people are going to look for those cards as well, because everybody's building the same stacks of these 6 suits. You want to have as many suits as possible, of course, so everybody's going for the same cards, and everybody's going to try and find those lower cards at the beginning of the game and the higher cards at the end of the game, so as soon as they show up, people are going to go for them. So they might end up taking that card that you wanted, or that stack of cards that you wanted, and So there's a bit of a competition element there as well. Not as much take that, because I feel people aren't going to grab a set of cards just because another player wanted them, because they want them too. So they're as valuable for every player as they are to you. So it's not much of a take that kind of element, but it's like a race to get them, you know, and a little bit of luck, of course, with which cards you draw from the deck and then, you know, get to pick. So there's that. And yeah, it's pretty much keeping an eye on other players as well, and keeping an eye on the size of the deck, and then deciding which cards to play and where to play them. You also want to keep an eye on matching these acorns, you know, playing these two decks next to each other will match these two acorns, so you get two acorns from the central pile of tokens. And you can use those, or you can just hoard them for points, or you can use those to go through the deck, get new cards out, or to get one of these scoring tokens here. You know, if there's a couple of them, and there's different ones in the game every time. And if you feel you can score one of those, that's 10 points. So you want to pay 3 acorns and get them before somebody else does. But even if somebody else does, it might still be worth going for that goal, because if you're the one who gets the most of a certain suit or whatever the token says, then you get 3 points if you're not the owner of that token, and the rest of the players don't get any points from that, because there can only be one person who scores that. So that's also a bit of a race to try and see which of those tokens will help me the most, and when to get them. It's of course good to get them as soon as possible, but then you might not have the winning condition yet, because somebody else might try to catch up on that and steal those 3 points before you can get the 10 points from that. So there's quite a few elements in this deceptively simple. You know, it looks simple, but it isn't. The gameplay is pretty simple, but there's a lot to keep an eye on, and that makes it a lot of fun. So you definitely, after one play, you definitely want to play again to see if you can do better. And since it's a relatively quick game, it plays in about 30 minutes. That's about right. Also depending on the number of players, but it doesn't really matter, because you go through the deck at the same speed anyway, even with 2, 3, or 4 players. So you just have to wait your turn a bit longer, but that's okay. So it doesn't overstay its welcome, and like I said, you kind of want to play again after one game. So yeah, in that regard, it's really a lot of fun. Replayability is also pretty high, because you have all these different landscape cards, so that will give you different things to try during your game, different bonuses that you can have, which is fun. And otherwise, you can try different things. You know, you might go for just having a couple of suits, having the most cards of those, focus on that, and less on other suits, perhaps. There are gold tokens that, you know, give you points if you own the most of one suit or of 3 combined suits. So you might want to adapt your strategy to these tokens, and these are randomized as well. So you got 5 of them in the game, and there's also 5 that you put upside down to put this this token on it. That means that a stack is locked and you can't put any more cards on it. But otherwise, you know, so there's always going to be 5 out of all of these tokens in the game, so it's going to be different, and you might want to adapt your strategy to that. So that adds to the replayability. Language dependency then finally. The game is fully language independent, because everything is explained with icons. Of course, the suits simply have a color, a shape of the leaf, and a value on it, plus these acorns, and that's all. And all of these landscape cards have icons on them as well, and they are all explained in the rulebook. On back there is an explanation of all these goal tiles, the objective tokens, and one page back you have all of these landscape cards, which are explained as well. So all you really need is a rulebook in your language, and I'm sure you can find translations of that online. I always go to Board Game Geek, go to the game's website on Board Game Geek and check the files section. They usually have plenty of translations there. There's also a video section where you might find a review with an explanation in your language. So all you need is the rules in your language, and the rest of the game is language independent. So that's also a plus. So all in all, apart from perhaps the theme, this game scores pretty well in my book. I really enjoyed playing it. It plays differently every time, plays just as fun with 2, 3, or 4 players, and they even have a solo mode, which I haven't tried yet, but it has a solo mode which has 3 scenarios in the rulebook, and it tells you which suits to use, which landscape cards to use, and which objective tokens to use. And there's 3 different scenarios that you can play. 2 of them are medium and 1 is difficult. And you need to find certain victory conditions. You need to reach those in order to succeed, to win the game. So that's pretty cool that they went through the trouble of adding that to the game as well. Usually games don't have that, and this one does. So that's, I guess, another plus to the game. So all in all, pretty interesting and fun game. Looks really beautiful, really liked it, and I hope this video was helpful to you in making a decision whether this game is for you or not. And if you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button as well. Also, check out my Patreon page by clicking the link in the description below or the Patreon icon at the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.